on, everyone? This is Lucas Ross Sports, Lucas Ross, your commentator. We continue our 2022 college football predictions. The Texas Longhorns are up next. I'll give you my official prediction for this team, give you my thoughts on this team, go through their schedule, and now we'll go from there. But before we do that, let's look back at 2021 for this Texas team. 2021, Texas went 5-7 overall. Really big surprise there that Texas went 5-7. I was really high on this team last year. I thought they would be better. You know, Texas fans weren't really pleased with how last season turned out. And to be honest, I really did not see Texas, finishing 5-7, but it did happen. But 2022, I think, is going to be a revenge year, a redemption year for Texas. They could be the second best team in the Big 12 this year. Offensively and defensively in the rankings last year, we look at those. 18th on offense last year, 99th on defense. They were a really good offensive team last year, and this offense should be really good. Once again, they do return good production on that side of the ball. Defensively, they bring, quite a bit back there as well. I think this Texas team is going to be a lot better. Let's be honest, I think they'll be a lot better. You look at the points per game, opponents per game as well, 35.2 points on the offensive side of the ball, and then 31.1 points given up on the defensive side of the ball. So a little similar stats there for them last year on both sides. I think the defense is going to be really good for the Texas Longhorns this season, and I think they'll be really better than people might say. Here's the schedule for Texas for 2022. They kick off the season against UL Monroe. That should be an easy win there for Texas. They do defeat them to begin the season on September the 3rd. They have no business in losing that game. And then there's that big game on September 10th, week number 2 against Alabama. Probably the biggest game, I think, in week number 2. This is a college game day type game as well. Alabama, though, Bryce Young coming back. Alabama brings quite a lot back on both sides of the ball. But I think Texas will score some points. It just depends if Texas can score some points in this game. I think Texas is clearly an underdog in this game. I mean, they probably will be a 40% underdog, maybe a 20-something% underdog in this game. But Alabama is really too talented. I think Alabama is going to win this one. I don't really see Texas pulling off a big upset here. If Alabama didn't have Bryce Young back, it would have been a lot different. Let's be honest. I think Texas would have been a lot closer, but I think Alabama is just too talented. They're too talented on that side of the ball. And then they take care of business against UTSA. I know UTSA was really good last year, but Texas should take care of business in that game as well. And there's that game on the road at Texas Tech, September the 24th. This is a tough place to play. It's a revenge game for Texas Tech. Last year, Texas really blew out Texas Tech last year. I mean, could it happen again this year? Not really. I mean, it's probably going to be a closer game than last year. I'll tell you what, it's one of those upset alert type games. I mean, it's one of those games that Texas, could potentially lose to, and I think that does happen. I think Texas Tech, with them playing at home and with it being on the road, it's a 50-50 matchup, and I'm going to say Texas Tech does pull off the win. If Texas was ranked in the top 25, I think Texas Tech does pull off an upset here. Just a tough place. It's not a tough place to play, but I think it will be one of those upset alert type games. And that's a really bad loss there, so they give Texas their second loss of the season. Next game is West Virginia at home on October the 1st. Another interesting matchup here. West Virginia is going to be really young on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, they bring quite a lot back on that side of the ball, but West Virginia's offense is going to be the main key in this game. But I think with Texas back at home, they'll get fired up after that Texas Tech loss, and they'll be fired up to get things going again. And I think they do defeat West Virginia here on October the 1st. Oklahoma, there's that big game there on October 8th. This one is a rival game. Oklahoma at Dallas, Texas. We know last year's game, Texas came so close to defeating Oklahoma, but now Oklahoma's changed. Lincoln Riley is gone. Caleb Williams is gone. So, I mean, is this the year that Texas finally defeats Oklahoma and ends that losing streak to this Oklahoma team? I think it does happen. Like I said in my Oklahoma video, I think it's back and forth, but I think Texas is clearly the better team in this one, and I think Texas does pull off the win here, at Dallas here and beats Oklahoma. It's probably a potential top 25 showdown, but I think Texas is probably out of the top 25, but I think Texas does win this one at home, or actually at Dallas, so it's a neutral site game, but I think Texas does defeat Oklahoma. Iowa State is next here on October 15th. Not really high on Iowa State this year. They lose a lot from last year's team as well. So, I mean, I think this team is not going to be really good on offense or defense this year. They're going to be really young on both sides. And I think Texas does win this one, and they improve to 5-2. Next game is on the road at Oklahoma State. This is another tricky game here for Texas. And when I look back at my Oklahoma State video, kind of regret Oklahoma State's record. I think they are better than that, but I think, it's just the amount of losses on the defense that I think will struggle for Oklahoma State. The safeties are gone. I mean, the secondary is just going to be a big question for Oklahoma State this year. And I think Texas just has a big advantage in this game, and I'm going to go with the Longhorns. I think they do go on the road and defeat Oklahoma State, but it's one of those upset alert type games as well. But I think Oklahoma State is clearly a good team, just not really good this year. I think it just comes down to that defensive side of the ball for them. Then they get to the month of November now, face Kansas State on the road. And when I look back at my Kansas State video, I think this Kansas State team is just a lot better as well than Texas. But let's face it, I'm really high on Texas this year. I think they're going to have a better season. But this game is tough. It's a really close one here. It's a potential loss, but I got to go with Texas. I'm going to say they pull off the win there on the road at Kansas State. But it's not going to be an easy game. Not saying it's going to be a blowout. I'm saying it's going to be a back and forth contest. I think Texas, I just love the offense here and the defense here for Texas, and I give them the returning production advantage as well. So I think Texas does win that one on the road at Kansas State. TCU is next on November 12th. TCU is a really interesting team this year that I'm really high on. I don't really see them, though, going to the Big 12 championship, to be honest. And, I think this is a trap game for Texas, but I think TCU will just come up short. But I think Texas is clearly the better team, and they're at home anyway, so I think it's going to be a win there for Texas on November 12th against TCU. Kansas is next here on the road. Revenge game here for Texas. I know it was a big surprise last year that Kansas defeated Texas. I mean, people were just saying that, how did Kansas defeat Texas? Well, it just wasn't meant to be. Texas did not bring their A game. If they don't bring their A game in this one either, they're not going to win this game. I mean, they got to win this game somehow, but, I think it does happen. I think Texas does get revenge in this game. Kansas is going to be a really good team this year, but they're not going to be that team that makes a really big, jump into the Big 12. They just will have a lot of close games. And I think it's one of those games, but I think Kansas will, or actually Texas will win this game against Kansas on the road. And there's that final game against Baylor at home on November 26th. Baylor going to be an interesting team this year. Not really high on them as I was last year. Or actually, I was not high on them last year, but I'm not as high on them as this year as well. I think, Texas being at home, I think they'll be really fired up in this one. And I think they do defeat Baylor here to end the season. And the overall prediction I have for Texas comes out to be 10-2. I know that people will be surprised by that, but I see this team maybe going 8-4 as well, because they can potentially lose to Oklahoma State and Kansas State, but they could also lose to Oklahoma. I mean, they could wind up going 7-5. I think that's the worst case scenario for Texas, is 7-5, but still enough to get to a bowl game. But 10-2 is my official prediction for Texas for 2022. Stay tuned here for more on Lucas Ross Sports.